Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm Pippa Crerar, I'm political editor of Daily Mirror, and we're joined from America, from the States, by Geraldine McKelvie, who's our Sunday investigations editor, who sat down with Jennifer Arcuri and interviewed her at length. You've seen some of the stories in the papers yesterday and today and online, and there were some fairly astonishing revelations in there, which I'm sure you'll have lots of questions about, and which Geraldine and I are both very happy to try and sort of share our thoughts on. But thought it made sense first of all just to ask you, Geraldine, since you sat down with Jennifer Arcuri, and what you felt the sort of the most jaw-dropping revelations were that she shared with you.
Well, I think one thing that she shared with us, which sort of asks, which makes us ask questions about Johnson's character. It's just the fact that while he was on these trade missions, they were communicating, and they were, he was asking her for pictures and things like that while he was on a taxpayer funded trade mission. And I see that this morning his press secretary has said something along the lines of he acts with honesty and integrity. I think that's one of the key questions that we're asking. The revelations that we've made over the weekend, it doesn't seem that that's the case. And I think the public interest concern surrounding this story is the fact that did he breach the Nolan principles, which the Greater London Authority's Code of Conduct is structured around, and honesty and integrity are two of the Nolan principles. And I think what we're seeing with what's come out of Jennifer's interview is that probably there's questions to be asked about that.
And what astonished me when I first read the transcript of your interview was how long the relationship had gone on for. I mean, it was the best part of 4 years, which is a lot longer than I think we had realised previously. And while Boris Johnson has never been a politician to kind of hold others to high standards in their own personal lives, and to a certain extent, some of his private relationships are sort of priced in. He was married at the time, and as you rightly say, there were questions surrounding whether he should have declared the relationship in the public interest. I mean, Jennifer was on 2 of his trade missions to New York and to Israel. I was on both of those trade missions, covering the trips as a journalist, as a reporter. And then, of course, there was various grants which were allocated to her. Now, I think we've probably made clear that the IOPC, which is the police watchdog, cleared Boris Johnson last year of any criminal wrongdoing, but it did say that it thought that it might have been wise for him to declare the relationship, and that the GLA might want to look, as you rightly say, with the Nolan principles as to whether he breached it. So there's a question from Jordan Hobson, who's asking us whether we've got any proof. Now, I think he must mean any proof of the relationship. Do you want to explain some of the detail that Jennifer went into with you to explain where our proof comes from? We should, by the way, just clarify, Jordan, that the Prime Minister's been asked about this on multiple occasions, about whether he had a sexual relationship with Jennifer, and it's not been denied. As is his strategy, he doesn't sort of confirm or deny these things generally. But Geraldine.
Well, we spent a long time standing up this story and making sure it was true. As you can see from the revelations in the Sunday Mirror yesterday and in the Daily Mirror today, we have seen some text messages between Jennifer and the Prime Minister. We've also, the front page of the Daily Mirror today, she's taken a photo in his family home. So we've got quite a lot of evidence that there was a lot of contact between them over these 4 years, and Jennifer has claimed that they were having an intimate relationship for the duration of those 4 years. One thing that we always make sure that these are obviously big allegations against a powerful person, so we did spend a long time making sure that we had a lot to back up what we were saying.
And we also went to number 10 before anything was published. I mean, that's absolutely, the basic and the right thing to do, legal thing to do as well, is to give them the opportunity to comment. And on both occasions, both of the stories in the Sunday Mirror yesterday and again in the Daily Mirror today, they declined to comment. As I say, I've covered Boris Johnson and his both his professional and his personal life for many years, and it sort of is his. It is his. I guess it's his, because he has a very colourful personal life, as we all know, and has done for a long time. It's his approach just to really not to engage in any of these private matters. But I think a lot of people have asked me, Geraldine. Obviously, there's the sort of the details about the affair in this story, which are fairly staggering, and marmalade droppers, as we call them in the trade. Reading them over your breakfast, and as well as the duration of the relationship, one of the which really struck me was the first time they slept together. It was just before the Paralympic opening ceremony, and shortly afterwards he was sitting between Princess Anne and his ex-wife, now ex-wife Marina. And then the revelations in today's paper about sort of the relations in the family home, and obviously the sort of the private revelations are pretty astonishing, but ultimately this isn't just sort of tittle tattle about his private life, is it? There's a much bigger issue at stake here when it comes to the public interest of this. He was Mayor of London at the time. He didn't declare this relationship. While we're not suggesting that there was a conflict of interest, there may have been a conflict of interest, and it might have been wiser for him, as the IOPC suggested, to declare it.
Exactly, and I think that what we need to make clear in this regard is it was on him to declare that as a conflict of interest, or a potential conflict of interest, because, as you say, the investigation as to whether there actually has been a conflict of interest is still ongoing. But it wasn't Jennifer Arcuri's responsibility to declare that. She wasn't Mayor of London, Boris Johnson was, and Jennifer said to me that she didn't understand the rules around the Greater London Authority's Code of Conduct. She didn't understand what the obligations were on him to declare sort of personal interests, because she wasn't an elected representative. She wasn't, an official figure like he was, and she just, her account of this is she just wanted to get ahead in her career. She wanted these opportunities to be on these trade missions. She didn't realise that having a personal relationship with Boris Johnson, she didn't know what the letter of the rules were about declaring potential conflict. So it's very much on if there has been a conflict of interest, which, like we say, we still have to establish if that's definitely the case. But it was his responsibility to declare that in his role as Mayor of London. So I think it's important to remember that if there was an obligation to declare it, it was on him and not on her.
Mm-hmm. And then the next step in this is for that Greater London Authority Oversight Committee investigation to resume. Now, this started a while ago, but was suspended when the IOPC, the police watchdog, launched its investigation. And then when that ended last May, we were in the middle of the COVID crisis, so the committee decided to delay it again. Now, I've spoken to members of the committee in the last few days who have told me that they plan to resume it after the May elections, so we're looking sort of 6 weeks' time. And then obviously there's going to be the opportunity, there may be the opportunity to call the Prime Minister to give evidence. Now, I think the committee are in two minds about whether they want to do that, whether they need to do that. It could be, for example, that they can rely on written evidence if the Prime Minister provides the relevant information. But should they decide to call him, then they have it under the powers that they have under the GLA Act. They can potentially legally summons him, which means he would have to appear as a witness and to give evidence. And should he refuse to do so, there's actually steep fines, and potentially, and I'm not suggesting it's going to come to this, but potentially, because it would be a legal obligation, the prospect of a jail sentence if he refused. Now, I think we're getting several steps ahead of ourselves here, but it is interesting that we potentially could see him sitting in front of the committee in a few months' time. There's another question from Carol Johnson. Geraldine, do you want to take this one? Why she decided to expose all this now?
Well, that is a good question, because obviously the revelations in the Sunday Times were in September 2019, so it's been over a year since this story was first broken, and she never she obviously didn't confirm the relationship or the intimate part of the relationship for a long time. What she said to me was that she felt quite betrayed by the Prime Minister, because they'd had a obviously, what she says was an intimate relationship for 4 years, but they'd always remained on friendly terms. There had never been any animosity. There had never been any sort of big horrible breakup or anything. They'd always been cordial, and she always felt that he was someone she could trust. And when this all broke, he completely blocked her. She was left to deal with a sort of international media storm on her own. She didn't know how to manage that. She was sort of thrust into the spotlight without any kind of guidance from him or any of his people as to how to deal with that. She tried to get in touch with him, she says, and she said that his phone was answered by an advisor who hung up, or in any event didn't put her through to him. And she just feels that it speaks to the character of the man, that when everything happened, when the story broke, he just didn't get in contact with her, didn't try and support her, didn't offer her any advice as to how to deal with it. And at the end of the day, I think as well, she wants to make clear that it's one thing she said to me as well is that it's often the woman that gets blamed for everything. And actually, when we're looking at, was there a potential breach of the Nolan principles, this is something for him to answer, as he was the person in any official capacity. There's not any suggestion that there has been any wrongdoing on her part. I think in terms of the DCMS grant she got in 2019, a government inquiry has already established that was appropriate, that her Hacker House firm was given that money. And also, I don't think, because that was after their relationship had ended, and I don't think there was any evidence that he had any influence over that. But she just feels that.
Oh, I think Geraldine's frozen there. That's what happens when you're doing transatlantic calls. I think our tech people will try and get her back. But I think we've been thinking quite a lot about the political impact of this, and whether actually, when you look at Boris Johnson's history, this sort of behaviour, this sort of relationship is priced in. And obviously there's been, over the years, many examples of extramarital relationships. He is, of course, now divorced and is engaged to Carrie Symonds and lives in Number 10 with her and their baby. So, hopefully he's turned a corner on all this. It's a new chapter of his life. But I think that it's quite interesting thinking about whether there's ever any potential political fallout from this. And as I say, I think this sort of behaviour is priced in with the Prime Minister. He's kind of a unique individual, and in terms of his personality, he's been able to I think get away with all sorts of things that other politicians might not be. He sort of, the language he's used in the past, some of it quite controversial, his colourful private life, some of his sort of actually quite stark U-turns, and for example, on the Brexit debate, he took one side of the argument and then switched to the other side. Suggestions that he's sort of such an ambitious individual that his that he's prepared to do anything to sort of reach higher office, which is of course what he's now done. So I think Geraldine, we've got you back now. That's great. I'm just saying,
I'm in a hotel with very dodgy Wi-Fi, so I've
dangers of transatlantic communications. Obviously, I'm just saying that a lot of this is priced in with Boris Johnson, this sort of behaviour, and actually whether there's a longer term political impact is actually, when it comes to the affair itself, it's pretty devastating for his ex-wife and his family, I imagine. But actually, the thing that we're, I think, most focused on is sort of public interest aspect, and whether there is whether there is a longer term impact on him. Besides the investigations that we've already talked about, that have happened and that obviously will be picked up later this year, what do you think the public impact, the public reception to this story will be?
I think that's a really interesting question, and I think it's one that only sort of time will tell. I think because obviously we talked earlier about the Greater London Authority, the Oversight Committee investigation. Now that's obviously going to take some time before that comes to its conclusion. So it'll be interesting to see what the findings of that are, if they do think that he did breach the sort of Nolan principles which govern public life. I think what the revelations that we've had in the paper, in the Sunday Mirror and the Daily Mirror over the last few days, I think, like as I said before, it sort of speaks to the character of the man. It shows what kind of person he is privately, and is that like what you've just been saying about his position on Brexit and things like that. Is that indicative of how he is in public life? But I think in terms of the public impact of it, I've had a lot of messages from people who think his behaviour is disgusting. But I think it's going to only time will tell how this might affect him. Affect the public perception of him.
And there's a comment there from Lee Foster, who thinks that the Prime Minister should go. And it's calling into question the public money that Jennifer had. Now, of course, the DCMS inquiry and indeed the IOPC inquiry both cleared him and then and DCMS initially of any criminal wrongdoing. So it's really all on whether there was sort of like an ethical wrongdoing, if you like. It's all down to the GLA committee going forward. There you go, some more comments at the bottom of the screen. I mean, I think what's clear is that Boris Johnson is a very divisive politician, and it's really interesting. I think his trajectory, as Mayor of London, I mean, for a Tory to win London twice was a really big feat, and he did that by kind of being Boris Johnson the personality first, and Boris Johnson the Tory politician second. And then I think what's happened since he became Prime Minister, both with the Brexit campaign, which of course was very divisive, and then after that running quite a sort of belligerent general election campaign. Lots of people felt he sort of kind of appealed, adopted populist rhetoric, and I think that somebody who was once a very unifying politician has actually become a very divisive one. And I think going forward and looking at the handling of the coronavirus crisis and so on as well, it's clear to me that there are there's members of the public who will back him and support him come what may, and will kind of not be too bothered about his personal life. And then there'll be people who frankly, have no time for him, regardless of what he does. So the key sort of group, if you like, in terms of the public, are those in the middle who are, of course, often swing voters. And I think when it comes to it, for them, it's going to be the public interest. It's going to be whether he breached the sort of code of conduct for public life and so on that are going to be interesting. There's somebody saying that it happened before he became PM, so it doesn't count. If that comment is about with the public now, then I suppose for Boris Johnson supporters that might be true. But Geraldine, do you think it matters that we hold our politicians to account, even if it's sometime after the event? I mean, let's not forget the GLA has a mandate to recall mayors up to 8 years after they've stood down from office to question them.
Yeah, I think it does count. I think it is important that he's held to account for what might have happened when he was Mayor of London. Like you said, to win for a Tory politician to win London twice in a row is in such a Labour supporting city is a huge that was a huge thing at the time that he managed to do that. But I think it's very important. It's very important that the public are allowed to know if their Prime Minister, the most senior politician in the country, has potentially not conducted himself in accordance with the Nolan principles, which ask for things like honesty, integrity, openness from elected officials. I think there is very much a public interest in people getting to know that that's their Prime Minister.
Yeah, and in terms of the communication between them, obviously, we in the piece, in the interviews, Jennifer's described some of the messages they sent each other and so on. Is there any suggestion that there was emails between them?
There was, I think that there was some email communication between them, but I think it was quite limited. I think they mainly communicated via text. But one thing, Jennifer obviously has a cyber security company, and one thing that Jennifer was worried about at the time was how reckless he appeared to be being with his personal communications. He was communicating with Jennifer on a mobile phone, and quite often the messages were just sent as a sort of normal SMS text messages. Now they are very vulnerable to being intercepted. The sort of mobile carrier can read what you're saying. It's not like using an app such as Telegram or WhatsApp, where there's end-to-end encryption, meaning only you and the other person who you're communicating with can read the messages. So you'll be sending her text messages and iMessages, which are both a lot more vulnerable to interception. And obviously, for any sort of senior politician, that's a big risk to be conducting your sort of personal communications in that way.
Mm-hmm. Were you surprised that the number 10 or the Prime Minister decided not to comment on this story? Well, number 10 now has, of course, but the Prime Minister.
I wasn't too surprised by that, because if you look at when the revelations first came out in the Sunday Times in 2019, they made no comment. The only comment I could see that they'd made was after the conclusion of the IOPC investigation in May last year, where they called the complaint politically motivated. I think because it from the Greater London Authority, which is obviously now being run by Labour.
But Sadiq Khan is obviously the Labour mayor, but the London Assembly, which of course is this Assembly members on the Oversight Committee, is a cross-party committee, and that always, just because the administration is Labour, there's plenty of Tory members on the London Assembly too. So I think the sort of dismissal of the committee as politically partisan is a political trick in the playbook, to try and prove their findings, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because obviously, like you said, it is a cross-party committee, as are most sort of local government committees. So I think I wasn't hugely surprised that they decided not to comment, because he famously doesn't comment on his private life and on his like sort of personal affairs. But I think the public interest aspect of this means that it's not just revelations about what he's done privately and whether or not he might have been unfaithful to his wife. It's about whether or not he conducted himself properly when he was Mayor of London. I think that the fact that he's never made any attempt to deny a relationship with Jennifer, I think that's very telling. Given he's a man who doesn't comment on his private life, I think the fact that he's never made any attempt to deny this relationship, I think that's important.
Well, the Prime Minister's doing a press conference this afternoon at 5:00, and will be asked questions by a select few journalists. Sadly, the Daily Mirror is not amongst them today on a basis, but interesting to see whether he's asked about this, because obviously number 10 was earlier. So, Geraldine, thanks for joining us from the States, and for sharing the story with us. I hope you get home safely whenever that happens, and take care, and thank you everybody for watching and for your questions. Cheers now.